I now feel better. Not just is the post-traumatic stress better, not just is the anxiety and the panic attacks. I feel better than I've ever felt ever. My life before psychedelics, so I grew up, I would say, with a pretty healthy family, mainly on the East Coast. I would say a big thing in our life growing up was it was religious in a way. I mean, my family are very staunch Roman Catholics, so kind of grew up in that atmosphere. Again, that kind of set values and started to kind of weave the fabric of who I was. And then when I turned 18 and first got out of high school, again, growing up in that area, 9/11 occurred. I kind of put any future thoughts on pause. And I said, I need to do something. Being from that area, you're directly and indirectly affected by events like that. And it really kind of sparked something in me to say, I need to give back. I need to do something for greater than myself. So that led me to the Marine Corps, and then which eventually led me to the things and the challenges that presented later in life that brought me to psychedelics. So I became introduced to psychedelics to hopefully help me transform and move through a lot of the unfortunate things that veterans, especially combat veterans, have to deal with. So I was actually in the Marine Corps from 2002 to 2006. And during those deployments, exposed to a lot of stuff that I never thought I would ever see, engage in things that I never thought I would ever have to engage in. I mean, there's the thought of what, being a combat Marine is. There's what you see in the movies, and then there's the reality of the situation. There's a human on the other side, regardless of borders, regardless of country. That's a human being. That's kind of where the whole moral injury comes into play. I finished my time in the Marine Corps and was really reeling from post-traumatic stress, from depression, from anxiety. Suicidal ideation became a daily thing. Living a life that I was, just filled with shame, filled with anger, filled with rage. I think around 2020, I hit rock bottom. My family life was falling apart. I was having trouble, managing my career. That I couldn't find it in me to make any meaningful connection. As life has it, I had something fall in my path. I made my way to the Marcus Institute for Brain Health. And that's where I came across Dr. Andrea Lucy at the Marcus Institute. She's my guardian angel. Everything that I did made me a little bit better every single day. And some of those symptoms started to dissipate, but they were still there. I just couldn't get over the hump. Like I said, about a year after kind of engaging in all of those activities and starting to learn more about psychedelics and alternative medicines, I was introduced to an organization called the Mission Within, which that's where my psychedelic adventure began. So my psychedelic journey began when my guardian angel introduced me to Dr. Martin Blanco and the folks at the Mission Within. So the retreat's done in Mexico. Made our way to the retreat house, and that's kind of where the journey really kicked into drive. We sat down within an hour of being there and was just sharing our story, why we were there, what our intentions were, what we wanted to work on, and just tears started falling from everybody in the room. And for me, I wanted that trauma to stop with me. I didn't want it to be something that I passed down to my children and that they passed down to theirs. It's just a very conscious decision. And then that first evening, they bring us up, they give us the Ibogaine. There's a mattress where we lay down. We put on our blindfold. We put in our music for the journey. And then you sit there and you kind of wait. Maybe you've heard some stories about Ibogaine. It's one of those that people share as being one of the more transformational medicines that you can ever work with. From the time that I took it that evening, I was in it until probably late day the next day. So it was almost 16 hours. It's a clinical psychedelic retreat. So for me, there were doctors in the room, there were nurses in a room. So for somebody like me who's very objective, analytical, and came from the healthcare space, it kind of just put me at ease. And then within probably about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, I could feel the medicine start working. You could feel it from the tips of your toes all the way to the tips of your hair. A lot of the experience, it's very challenging to put into words, but I could feel it physically working through my body, almost like as if there was a presence there that was scanning my body to find areas that needed to be worked on. Because it was almost like a heat sense or a felt sense that it would start moving up, and then it would find a spot and it would move back down and it would work on that spot for a little bit. That was probably the first hour and a half to 2 hours of that experience. And then the next phase was like a Rolodex of my past, almost as if you were sitting in a movie theater watching, your own life. For me, I had the intention of going in and I wanted to dive into those things that I think were so, those traumas were so somatically buried in me that I couldn't even access them. Like I knew they were there. I know there were things that I experienced that I almost couldn't even recall. And I thought I had to go in there and I had to bring all that up and dredge it up and in order to move past it. And the medicines just told me, no, you don't need to. You need to let that baggage go. You got what you needed to get from that. You may not fully understand it, but really all of that pain and all that struggle brought you to where you are now. I have almost like a felt sense of awareness versus a very visual experience. It was almost like I was in a very, very deep conversation with my higher self that I just hadn't been able to tap into for so long. The medicine put me in a space where my ego went offline. I recall words in my head saying like, tap out, I surrender. I can't do this anymore. Like this is too much. And that's where my ego got out of the way and healing began. Again, from that 10,000 foot view, it was almost like a constellation of events where you could see one thread leading to another thread to another thread. But there were threads that I didn't have access to, right? They were how my life and what I was doing was impacting those around me and how that led to changes in their life and transformations in their life. It was deeply healing. And, I saw even the most traumatic events there and how they led to beautiful, beautiful things. It was letting me know that regardless of how challenging it is, it's a matter of perspective. And that change in perspective, however so slight, was absolutely transformational. And then also out of that phase, I think, something that I gained was a true sense of awareness, right? I was tapped into, what I'm calling my higher self. I mean, I'm sure you can call it whatever. Now I knew, okay, like this is my ego or this is my higher self telling me this is what I need to be doing. But now that I had, I understood the frequency of both those voices, I was able to say, okay, both my higher self, my ego are in agreement here. This is what I need to be doing. And then, that moved on to a phase that lasted, the better part of 6 or 8 hours, which was basically an overall silence and everything. And that was where I was able to kind of take all of those things that were being shown to me and start to create a plan to put them into my life. To say that those things were anything short of transformational would be a gross understatement. I now feel better, not just as the post-traumatic stress better, not just as the anxiety and the panic attacks. I feel better than I've ever felt ever that I can recall as a human being in my lifetime. I mean, I look at the world with a child's sense of wonder, right? I'm able to kind of have meaningful, deep relationships with everyone around me. So it's really just set the platform for the next, it's not even the next chapter. It's almost like a completely new book of life. They start your integration immediately afterwards. Where were you in your space? Where were you at with working through your intentions? Do you feel like you got what you needed? So most of the time, the next day is kind of recovery and starting to dig a little bit into that. And then the following day was the 5-MeO DMT experience. This is my analogy is I felt like as if I was a computer that was running for 40 years and I never did an update. And I never defragged it. I never even powered it down for a minute. And the Ibogaine wiped my hard drive, right? It was a hard reset, but it's almost like if you pull a bandage off a wound, so you're just completely open. But the 5-MeO, that plugs you in. For me, it was like being directly plugged into source, to God, to love, whatever you want to call it. All of those feelings that I hadn't had in almost 20 years flooded back. And I had the most overwhelming sensation of love and peace where I felt like every update I could ever needed was given to me in 15 minutes, which, I think that's the challenge of integration from a 5-MeO DMT experience is it's very, very short and it's very abrupt. It was so profound that I haven't needed to go back to the medicine since, honestly, really with those two medicines together. I mean, there's such a beautiful synergy, but integration is a lifetime of work. It's an ongoing thing. And I think for me, what was so important and what the organization provided me was I wasn't on my own, right? I was in a community of people who had gone down that path, and not just anyone, with veterans, right? I think it's so important to be in a community of peers where, you can be completely vulnerable. So that's been my integration in a nutshell. I guess I can only share what I thought was probably the most helpful thing for me. And I think it was cultivating a deep sense of mindfulness. If you can start to to work and cultivate that, I think that will go a really, really long way, just not in your path to the medicine, but your path after the medicine.